So let's get started. Thank you very much, Jeff, for accepting my invite for this session. I know you have done a lot of work around reactive screen flows. You have developed a game, and also you published recently an article on unofficialsf.com about styling, right? On screen flows. That was also a very interesting one. But before we get started, let us introduce ourselves. Let me just introduce you very briefly before you introduce yourself. Please give us like a lengthier background of yourself. So you are Jeff Kranz, a platform product program manager at RiskConnect. And we also know that you love the SFDX Discord platform, and you are one of the main players there, main admins there, right? You contribute quite a bit to the community. And I know, among other things, that you love flows quite a bit, right?
Well, you kind of have to if you're going to be working on Salesforce, don't you?
I think you have to. That's what I think. But, you know, I'm biased, as you know me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so you summed it up pretty well. My title, I work at RiskConnect. It is an OEM. RiskConnect is an OEM, and not a lot of people know what an OEM is, or even that we even exist, but it's an interesting niche of the ecosystem where we are a business that delivers risk management software, and our primary tech stack is Salesforce. We are like an ISV in that we build our product using packaging. And the difference is that we don't intend to deliver our product alongside a CRM instance. You know, someone buys Salesforce to use as a CRM. When a customer onboards with us, we spin them up a RiskConnect specific instance of Salesforce with our product in it. And so we are leaned very heavily into Salesforce technology, and it is very interesting niche of the ecosystem. You may have heard of Viva, or Financial Force sells as an OEM as well. It gives you a chance to get a really broad and deep perspective of what's possible on Salesforce. Everything from the packaging considerations of an OEM, but the customers also expect you often, in our case anyway, to have joint responsibility over the org. So you have that real close perspective of what it's like to be a customer and configure on top of packaging model. So you get kind of that, both of that perspective of ISV and specific how to implement a packaged solution. As you mentioned, I am also a moderator at the SFXD Discord community. We've got something like 14,000 members. It's a really active community of Salesforce professionals. We're open to, you go ahead and join that link. We got a link there that you can go to join our community. The moment I joined it, I realized that it was something that really aligned with sharing knowledge that I like to do. But it also kind of comes back to what I do in my job is that I'm a product manager. I don't day-to-day implement Salesforce. My users are admins, developers, people who build on Salesforce. So the things that I build as the platform product manager, or my team builds, is features and solutions and utilities that are cut across our various product lines. And so we build tools for extending flows. We build record sharing engines, that kind of thing, where we build on top of Salesforce and things that are useful across product lines. And since my users are admins and developers, it aligns very closely with the type of people in general in the Salesforce ecosystem. And I found that to stay closely informed on what the needs are and the problems that those types of users need to solve, it's a great community to stay in touch and really understand those needs. And I like to give back to, because as I grew up through this ecosystem, I've been with Risk Connect for over 11 years now.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, it's been fun. It started when it was about 50 people, and now we've got about 1,000 employees, and it's been a fun ride. And it's the community, the Salesforce community, was a big part of how I was able to accelerate my own understanding of the platform, and being a moderator there and giving back to the community is also a big part of that. And so, but you don't see me just there. I also contribute to Unofficial SF. You'll see me on Twitter. I am on a few different Slacks, but not as active, but I am on those as well. I just try to, it helps me stay in touch, and I like to give back, and, forming relationships is great. A lot of people I've made friends with that I hope to be lifelong friendships. So
that's how we met, on these platforms.
Exactly.
Right? Years ago, before, we've never met face to face, right? We haven't yet.
You haven't.
That's what happens. That's what happens with these things. But I forget about it, which is a good thing, great thing, right? Let me just try and recap what an OEM partner is for some people who actually don't know. So you've said it already, but maybe in different words. You have custom software running on top of Salesforce, customization, which solves a particular business problem that is licensed and sold to your customers. In your case, I think they utilize your software to manage their risk, right? They create a risk registry and so on, whatever is under that realm, the profession, you actually help them to manage. But to be able to use your software, they have to also buy Salesforce. They have to be Salesforce customers. Maybe they are already Salesforce customers, maybe they are not. So if they are not a Salesforce customer, they are going to buy Salesforce with you. So that makes you an OEM partner. So you are able to also provision and sell Salesforce licenses to these customers and users, right?
That's right. And it's a little bit like transparent to most of our customers. They don't think of it as buying Salesforce and then putting us on top of it. Salesforce is more or less our technology provider, and so they have an agreement. We convince them that yes, we are your vendor that's going to help you solve your risk management problems, and let's get you started with Risk Connect, and we spin you up an instance of Salesforce with Risk Connect in it, and they off to the races. And so to them, it's getting Risk Connect that happens to be on an instance of Salesforce. We do have a significant portion of our customer base does have Salesforce. Salesforce is everywhere. And so that's one of the advantages, is that they have in-house expertise that can help with administering Risk Connect. And if they need to, they can share data, but it wouldn't be installed into that same environment, largely because our customer base wants that separated.
Cool. Let me just introduce myself also briefly. There could be a few people who don't know me. Some of your fans may be watching this, right, Jeff? So my name is Andy Engin Utkan. I'm a Salesforce MVP, and I run a platform called SalesforceBreak.com. And I do a lot of teaching around flows and automation in Salesforce. I have free resources on the YouTube channel where you may be watching this. I have a weekly newsletter that I issue on LinkedIn platform where you could be again watching this stream. And I have a Udemy course. I run a bootcamp course that lasts about 6 weeks, where I try to teach everybody everything I know about flows. And I run also a Slack workspace called Flownatic Workspace, where we teach people how to use flows. Like, as an alternative to the Discord space, the Discord space is also a very valuable resource. It just depends on, I guess, what your preference of communication is. We have Trailhead questions and answers. We have Slack. We have Discord. We have all these channels available for you. If you're going to learn flow, we're going to find you and help you, right? So that's the idea. So Jeff, tell us about the reactive screen flow functionality and how you like that. You know, what do you do with that?
Oh, I love it. It's a really exciting feature that had been hinted at for quite some time, that was coming, and now that it's here, it's super valuable. There are some things that I'm still waiting on for it to really, really truly leverage it. But it's something that is a real pain point for flows for a long time, has been, the kind of like screen by screen by screen, needing, to force users to have to, put an input and click, put an input, then click. And so reactivity really enables you to consolidate that, make better user experiences, and anything you can do to improve the user experience while improving the administrative and maintenance experience, to me, is a win. And so reactivity plays a big part in that.
Cool. And before we continue and dive into the flow that you have built, let's warn people who are watching this from within the United States, right? We just realized after scheduling this live broadcast that in the middle of this broadcast, for some reason, somebody decided to send a warning message to all mobile phones in the United States. So pretty soon, I think your mobile phones may be screaming murder, and that's just for test purposes. We have removed our mobile phones from the space, just in case.
Yeah, my phone is off. And so I had briefly considered trying to tell people that, oh yeah, I'm going to build a flow that has an invocable that's going to send an emergency alert to every device in the United States, and do that right at 20 after, when that's going to be happening. But I don't know if anyone would believe me.
I wouldn't want to be working on that. One small mistake and you're waking up everybody in the middle of the night, right?
That's right. So yeah, that'll happen in about 3 minutes, but hopefully that won't be too disruptive. So to kind of segue in from my involvement in the community and in Discord, and my role as a product manager, is that each release, with each new feature rollout, one of the things I challenge myself with is, what can I do with the out-of-the-box configuration tools? Because one of the things I need to know is, what should we prioritize in building? Because resources are finite. We can't build everything to fill every gap. And so to help me understand deeply, what we should build, is I need to understand deeply what are the capabilities. And I try to really have some fun with it. I try to stretch the boundaries of what can be done with the out-of-the-box tools. And most of the time, I try to use realistic use cases, where I'm trying to meet some kind of use case that our customers often ask for, and see, how can I do that with out-of-the-box tools and features that Salesforce provides. Because I also want to know, hey, is there anything that we've built that we can retire in favor of something that Salesforce provides? That's also a kind of thing that is a big win. And so every release, I challenge myself with this. And in this case, in the Discord, when the display text reactivity beta came out, Adam White, the flow manager, he's a product manager for the flow team on Salesforce. He participates in the Discord community as well. Made a post that saying, hey, I wonder if someone could make a Frogger game with display text reactivity. And I think he knew that was going to bait me into saying, let me try this. Now, as we walk through this, one of my initial first thought was, Frogger is probably out, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is. But could I make a game, and could I do it without any custom components? Because if you could use a custom component, you might as well just build the whole game in a custom component. That's kind of cheating. That's not fun. And that doesn't teach me anything about the limits of what reactivity can do. And so the one thing I'll warn about this is that it was a useful exercise in learning about some of the limits of reactivity. It also may come off as more complicated than what your normal use case might be. And so I want to warn that if your takeaway is that, oh gosh, that's pretty complicated and there's a lot of considerations, my message around that should be that this is not your typical use case, and that there are many ways to use reactivity that are easy to use and powerful. And so, as we get into the weird stuff with this, it's not necessarily representative of reactivity overall. All right.
Yeah, let's go.
Let's
look at the flow.
jump in. So the way I figure we'll do this is first, I'll show you what I'm even talking about with the game that I built. I'll show you how I was able to actually build it, but then I'll dial it back, and then I will build a simplified version of it step by step, so we can see how, one, how you can get to that point, and two, some of the lessons I learned along the way. That sound good?
Sounds like a great idea.
All right. So let me share my screen.
Oh, this game kind of reminds me the basic games I used to program by entering code from books into my computer when I was a child.
Something funny is similar for me. My first software I ever programmed was on my TI-85 calculator back in middle school. So it brought me back to those days.
Yeah.
So I'll talk a little bit about what constraints led to this style of game. But what we're looking at here is a game that there is no custom component involved with this. This is all out of the box configuration. And so what the game is you'll see that I've got a game screen here. I've got a little X and I've got a little asterisk. And the objective of the game is to move the X to go and, I don't know, eat or cover up or use your imagination. It needs to get to that asterisk. And so I've got some controls here, and I can move that X horizontally. I can also move it vertically. And then I can move it along. And then when I finally get to the asterisk, I win. And then I added on the ability to pick your character. So I could change my X to an O. So simple game, right?
Yeah.
It's very simple to look at in the canvas. Yet that assignment isn't even necessary, really. All that's really necessary is this one screen. And when I look at this one screen, there's really not much to this one screen. But one thing you'll want to consider and keep in mind with reactivity is that now you've got behavior that's a little bit hidden. And so it's not always going to be not super obvious what interacts with what. So that's something you'll want to keep in mind with reactivity, is that you get it happens automatically. You don't have to do any special configuration. And you'll also need to be aware of how it behaves. So all of the complexity here is largely contained within this game screen display text, which displays a formula that I've got called game screen. And I can show you that right now, but we're not going to use this to learn how it works. I just want to give you a sense of that it's all kind of hidden in here. So it's a sneak peek. I know some of you out there are going, looking at that and going, oh, groaning, like, okay, that's how he did it. But I tried to keep it short, so maybe you didn't get a chance to do that. All right. So going back to the game, how do we dial this back and start thinking about how this all fits together? What I'll do is I'll start with showing, how to get this kind of game screen on it, and then start showing how you can put a character on it, how you can make that then move based off of user input, and we'll kind of iterate over that. But one thing you might be wondering is, well, why this style of game? You were asked to build Frogger. Why didn't you build Frogger? Most video games like Frogger or Space Invaders, things that have something on it that moves without user input, requires some kind of engine to be looping and operating constantly all the time, regardless of whether the user has taken any kind of action. In order for the cars in Frogger to move across the screen, that needs to happen regardless of whether the user is taking an action or not. ScreenFlow reactivity doesn't bring us that capability. It's not constantly reevaluating things. It's only reevaluating things when the user makes a change to an input. So I can't do anything that involves something that needs to happen without user input. It needs to rely on user input. I also can't store some kind of score or state. So you refer to it as state, some kind of persistent thing that I can tally up some kind of value. So I couldn't do something that involves keeping track of a score or keeping track of what the user had done, the history of what the user had done previously. It needed to be a game that was very simple and only could, that relied on just user interaction. So I came up with the idea that maybe I'll just have a box that the user can move around in, and the target and objective of the game would be to move your character until it gets to some target square in the box. So that's what I went into it thinking that my objective was, and I was happy to have done that. So how do I go about doing this? We'll want to add a screen to our flow. And I want to make sure I'm making it the right level of zoom for what I'm showing. Is this a good level? I want to make sure I'm showing everything, but without making it too small.
I think it looks good.
Excellent. So backing up just one moment before we get building with this, it does rely on display text reactivity, which is a Winter 24 feature. So you need to be in a Winter 24 org. And with Winter 24, the display text reactivity is an opt-in beta. So you'll need to go to process automation settings, and you'll see an option here to opt in to reactive display text beta. So you need to make sure that that's checked and saved before you can do this. So let's do this iteratively, like I've said. And what we want to do is figure out, well, how can I get a box to just display? Not interactive at all. I just want a box to display. And so we'll go to our handy display text. That's a a normal thing to think. I think it's fairly obvious that if you want to display something, you use display text. And so we'll call this our display game screen display text. And before we try to use formulas and try to make this operate reactively, let's just see if we can make a small box directly in the display text. So if you recall the characters I used, I just tried to use equal sign and pipe characters. So if I just do, let's make it a 3x3 square. So if I do 5 on top, that will let me have sides, and I do 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3 spaces, and then a pipe, and then I'll make it easy and copy and paste. You might notice, well, that doesn't seem to work quite the way I thought it would. I put 3 spaces here. Well, we need a monospace font, meaning that each character takes up the same amount of width, because I could just add a bunch of spaces here to try to make it the same, but then as soon as I add the character in there, it's going to change that and make it all goofy. So we need to use a monospace font. And so one thing you might think is I have font options in here. I can make this Courier. Courier is a monospace font. That kind of looks better right here, but it looks a little goofy here still. And if I save my flow, let's play. I'm sorry about that. Am I back now? My video dropped, but now my audio I can't hear. Andy, are you on mute? Oh, okay, so you can hear me. All right. So if I save this, and run debug, I notice, well, what the heck? There's just one space there. I put 3 spaces, and that's because when you have text in a display text, it actually consolidates extra spaces into one. So I got to do something a little bit more clever to get around that. And I will use a little technique that that Andy mentioned a little bit in the beginning of this around styling with Lightning Design System. I published a post on Unofficial SF about bringing the Lightning Design System into flows, and one of the behaviors that relies on, I highly recommend you go and read that, because it's a really useful, easy to use trick. It's a technique. I keep calling it a trick, but it's a higher level than a trick. It's a technique. But what that allows you to do, or what that relies on, is the ability to use HTML tags in display text. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what's called what's referred to as the pre-formatted text HTML element. And what that is called pre, and it says anything inside this element, I want you to preserve exactly the characters that is inside of that. Don't make it, don't eliminate extra white space, just show me exactly what I've got in there. And so in order to do that, I need to take this and I need to make it a formula field where I can then, so to speak, inject that HTML. I think that's a fancier term than what I'm actually doing. I'm just writing a formula that will build what I want to display. So I'm going to call this formula display, I'm sorry, game screen. So I have display game screen, and this is the game screen formula. And this is going to show me text. And I always like to expand this out a little bit to give me a little more space to work with. Now I copied, or I cut what I had already built into my clipboard, and I'm just pasting it in here. Now, I won't be able to just use this directly. I need to change the syntax a little bit to be, how a formula normally works. So I need to surround text that I want to display in single quotes. I'm using the wrong one there. And I want to concatenate them together with a line break between them. So I'm going to use the line break function. So what this formula is now doing is it's constructing those very same characters I had previously, but in a formula. Now what I want to do is what I talked about just a moment ago, is I want to surround this with what I mentioned as the pre-formatted HTML tag. And so just for readability reasons, I'm just going to put that on another new line. And that's just simply this pre tag. And I will append it the same way here. And I want to put at the end of it a closing version of that. So anything inside this pre tag, it's going to preserve exactly what I put into it. So now, if I save this and debug and run, wow, that looks a lot better, doesn't it? Each of these spaces, now I've got a 3 by 3. It's not exactly a square because each character is taller than it is wide, but it's a 3 by 3 grid in which I can now start putting stuff in it. So let's add our character. So back in our formula, let's just hard code a starting point for our character here. We want the X character, and so I'll just put that in the bottom left of our game screen, and I'll save this, and I'll debug, and there it is. I've got the X in the bottom left corner of that game screen. So now you want to start thinking about, okay, well, I mean, that's not a game. That's just displaying a bunch of characters. How do you make that actually interactive? Well, you got to be thinking now about, well, what kind of inputs do we have available for us to make this interactive? And so, putting aside for a moment that I'm going to have to put a formula, I'm going to have to include in the formula a way to look at the value of an input. I want to start thinking about, well, what kinds of inputs do I even have available to work with? And so after reviewing, I could put a number thing where you type in what coordinates you want to send your character to. That doesn't feel very fun. You could put a toggle, but that only gives you 2 choices. And so what I landed on was, hey, a slider could work pretty well for this. I could have two sliders, one for horizontal movement and one for vertical movement. Let's see if I could get that to work. And so what we could do is we can start with just, let's say, start with horizontal movement.
And Jeff, is this the out of the box slider?
This is the out of the box slider. You will find it under input. And you will see that there is a slider input component.
Yeah, I never used this. Probably part of the reason is because we didn't have reactivity before, right? With reactivity, it's much more useful.
Yeah, I mean, with a slider component, I think is a pretty narrow use case. I do think that there are use cases for using this as an input, but it's it's not something that users often expect to use when they're, when you're filling out a form. So it probably goes under the radar a bit as an option. And for this use case, it fits so well. I do think that a lot of the reactivity examples you see out there do use the slider because it's very expressive in how you can show how interactive it is. As you slide it around, you can see inputs or other things on the screen changing as you slide it. So it's a great way to kind of demonstrate what reactivity can do.
Cool.
And so I'll just try and give this some sensible names. I will call this horizontal control, similar label. And then I look at the range and I want to keep things simple. A lot of developers are going to scoff at me for this, but there's some weirdness with zeros as the input value. Seeing that as the default value, it sometimes doesn't quite work right. So I'm going to go with a 1 based range. So my lowest range is going to be 1. And since it's a 3 by 3 square, I want to constrain the possible values you could slide around at to just between 1 and 3. And it's just 1 step size, just means, I don't want to have, more than 1. If you could have 1 to 100, and then your step size be 10. So you go to, 0 to 10 to 20 to 30 and so on. And the default value, I want to start at 1. So now I've got a horizontal control that starts at 1, allows me to move it to 2 or 3. And so before we try to hook that up to anything, let's take a look at what that shows me here. Okay, I can see I can move that around like that. And this leads me to the next step. If I want to start incorporating that value into my game screen formula, as you start to do more complicated things with reactivity, one lesson I learned was that it's helpful to have use some debugging techniques. And so one of the things I wanted to share with everyone today was a useful debugging technique for reactivity. If you're using formulas that rely on input values, but you won't necessarily see it directly on your output, is that you can add a display text component to the screen as a temporary debugging mechanism. So I just call this display debugging. And I can use this as a way to just show me raw values or parts of values of what they are. So it helps me understand if I've got a formula that relies on the evaluation, like using functions, using it as an input value as the input for a function that then does some math, and then if it doesn't work, maybe there's something wrong with the input value or something like that. It's helpful to kind of have a place where you can see the different parts. And so I like to add a display debugging display text where I can say, well, what is the current horizontal control value? So horizontal control, and I can say, well, show me the horizontal control value. So then back in my game screen formula, start to think, well, how can I use that value? It's a number, 1 to 3. How can I use this to reactively change my display game screen formula? And this is where you start to kind of have to be a little creative. And I started thinking, well, what formula functions do I have? In my first attempt at this, I tried using some math with the LPAD and RPAD functions to dynamically calculate how many spaces to the left and how many spaces to the right need to be padded on to the X. That didn't work. I don't know if it's a bug or if it's just not supported, but it didn't work. And so I started to brute force it a little bit. So what I ended up doing is using a bunch of if functions, nested if functions, to check the current value of the control. And if it matches I have one for essentially every single coordinate in the game screen. And if the control matches the coordinates I'm checking, then it displays an X. And if it doesn't, then I display a blank space. It's something I consider maybe brute forcing it, but that's what ended up working. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's start with just this one row. We're doing horizontal control. And so I'm going to do an if, and I want to evaluate. I'm going to need to do, actually, I'm going to break this out into 3 if statements because I have 3 spaces across the bottom, right? And I always want that pipe. So I'm going to leave that outside the if. And I'm going to say if my horizontal control value equals 1, display the X, and if not, display a space. And then I'm going to copy and paste this 2 more times for each of those spaces along the bottom row. So I'm going to check if the horizontal control is equal to 2 and if the horizontal control is equal to 3. And then at the very end, I don't need these hard-coded spaces anymore, just that pipe. And so now I should have drum roll, please. We're doing this live. Hopefully I didn't mess it up at all. And of course, something I didn't do right there.
Syntax is our friend.
The syntax was fine. And this is where I did do quite a bit of experimenting around. Now that I recall, I do think I need to reference the control from another formula. So I need to add a new resource and make it a number. So I'm going to call this formula horizontal control. And I'm simply going to return the value, data type, number 0, and replace my horizontal control with that formula. And this is part of the fun. I didn't check the syntax. What did I miss there?
What's the pre at the end? The pre?
That's not an extra one. That's something. Oh, I have an extra reference there.
Oh, okay.
That got inserted by accident. And it's still something goofy about this. So I'm going to go and refer back to my game here.
Sure.
And let's see.
How was this done there?
So you see it's a bit more complicated in this one because I ended up adding a whole bunch more on top of it. And actually I did reference the value directly. So that's an interesting thing. We're doing this live. This is bound to happen, but you can see here, this is working, and you can start to see how
your character is a resource.
the character is yes, that's a resource, but I didn't start with that because I added that on later where I wanted to be able to control whether it was an X or an O. And I started that with a hard-coded character.
And you have an SLDS box div class thing up there.
That is something I also added on later as kind of like to put a little box around it. But what you can see here is the extrapolation of what I started there. So what I'm doing is for each and every coordinate within that box, and this is a bigger box, there's 4 vertical, so there's 4 4 columns. I'm sorry, 4 rows and then 10 columns. And so that means that I've got 40 if statements in here, a lot of copy paste. And you'll see one of them is a little bit different. Which one is that? Well, that is the one that has our target. Where is it here? Right here. So I have a hard-coded coordinate of 4 and 10. That is the asterisk. One of the things I want to come back to try is make that a randomized target. But then in the game screen, I have that same hard-coded coordinates as conditional display of the winning state to say if the control value is my target X and target Y, and I just those are variables that I've set to 4 and 10 as part of my attempt to make it randomized.
What's the API version of the flow you just created?
This is 59.
It's 59? Okay.
That's right.
Because
It has to be 59 for display text reactivity.
Yes.
And so you can see how these building blocks can kind of come together, and you start to try to do this iteratively, and you kind of run through different hiccups and trying to figure out the boundaries of what's easy and what's hard. This is definitely something that I wouldn't say is easy, but it was fun to learn, and I did learn a lot about some of the constraints. For instance, there is a length constraint on formulas to be reactive. If it's too long of a formula resource, then it won't be reactive. And so those considerations are documented if you go into the help documentation on reactivity. There's a good explanation of what the constraints are. So I highly recommend going to that documentation, reviewing that. If you've got a use case where you want to leverage reactivity, make sure you kind of understand what they're talking about with those constraints and considerations. And this kind of helped me surface some of those and kind of work within those bounds and try and do something fun. And I thought this was a cool thing, and I'm happy to be able to share it with you and your audience.
Yeah, that was fantastic, Jeff. Thank you. And in the early days of computer games, I think you kind of determined where your cursor was going to be, or where your player was going to be, using like a radio volume dial kind of thing. You would just rotate it and it would go horizontal, like sideways, right? If you had to go vertical, probably you had two of them. It kind of reminds me that a little bit.
Etch-a-sketch.
Yeah, this time with a slider. It's quite retro. I like it. And can you tell us a little bit about the unofficial SF post?
Yes. No, that is such a useful technique.
Yes. But before we get into the detail of that, let's give a shout out to unofficial SF, right? What is unofficial SF?
Oh yeah, so this is a website that Alex Adelstein started. He's a senior VP over at Salesforce Flow team, but it's a collection of volunteers from across the ecosystem that post useful information about building automation. It's not just flows. You'll see that there's things around orchestration, external services, next best action. But because flows are a really highly invested in feature and is useful across a bunch of different clouds and across the whole platform, a lot of it is very flow based. But I contributed to it occasionally, and this is where you'll find the origins and a lot of explanations around the unofficial SF actions and screen packs that you might often see out there. And Alex and the Flow team likes to post sneak peeks at upcoming features before the release. It's a great website, and I'm honored to be able to contribute to it. And so recently, about 6 weeks ago, I posted this article about bringing lightning styling into screen flows, because one of the challenges that remain, because there's been a lot of feature enhancements with flows over the years, and they can't boil the ocean. They can't do everything at once. And one of the things that I felt was kind of lacking at the moment is the ability to draw users' attention using styling that is consistent with the platform. So there's a lot of different styling options that are available to when you're building a custom component, or when you've got a basic base feature that you don't really have an option to do unless you build it custom. And I kind of worked out a technique that allows you to do just that without any custom components. And really, in some respects, is easier to, has advantages over building a custom component. So I highly recommend you coming and taking a look at it. Most of this is kind of just talking about how the technique works, which I do recommend you read, but it's really a matter of taking and copying and pasting. Once you kind of get how it works, it's really easy to use. It leverages custom labels, so you can kind of just do it once, and then you're able to use the technique across any screen flow that you've got in the org. But what you end up with is this ability to use the Lightning design system directly in your flows. And what you end up with on the screen in the builder is something that allows you to still see a preview. So if you had built a custom component to use some Lightning design system, you wouldn't see a preview of it in the builder. You would see just, hey, you've used a custom component here. With this technique, you are using display text, which means you get the content of what you're styling. You still get to see that in the builder without the actual styling yet. Then once you actually run the flow, the styling applies. And so
that's very interesting. And thank you for writing this, because I gave actually a presentation for Apex Hours about ScreenFlow UI design tips. And I did not know about this one then. We all know, like most of us know, that some of the components take HTML tags in their labels and things like that. There is some customization that we have found out through time that's available. On digital experience community side, some of the design elements can be controlled by the digital experience settings. But this is immensely useful. How many times have we received requests from the users and customers saying, okay, this is not easy to read. We want a higher contrast. We want more color in this. And this is going to be super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, like, look at, I mean, this right here is a great example. You get those scoped notification styles where you can really draw attention to something. If you got a warning or an error or success message, you want to draw attention of the user to that message. You know, it does its job of drawing your attention to it, and it does it in a way that aligns with you know, the rest of the platform that they're in the rest of the day. And the added bonus is that when you're in the builder building it, you don't lose that preview of the actual content of it. So this is what it looks like when it's in the builder. You see what you get to manage your message itself as a display text, and with that custom label prepended to it, boom.
Cool. Jeff, I think we are approaching to the end of our time together. I'm receiving many thank yous from the audience, both on YouTube and LinkedIn. Thank you very much for your time. It was great to cover this one. You produce a lot of useful content, and the people on SFTX know you very well, but some of your resources are not very well known outside. And it is my duty and pleasure to kind of promote and show everybody that these resources are out there. And I'm pretty sure people are going to be inspired to come up with like game designs, gamey things, like based on your production here. And I challenge everybody to produce something better, something nicer, something funner.
Yeah.
We always like to challenge each other and then produce even better content every time, the next round. So, and let us know. We'd love to see it, right? Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. And yeah, I want to see whatever games you can come up with. I want to see it. That'd be really fun to see.
All right, everybody, have a great day. Bye-bye.